The engines begin to turn in the dark. One by one, propellers cough, then roar, filling the air with vibration and smoke. The ground crew steps back. The bomber lurches forward, heavy, overloaded, straining against the concrete as if it already knows how far it is about to go. Inside, the crew is silent. They have trained for this moment. They have memorized checklists, practiced emergencies, learned how to trust the men sitting inches away from them. But none of that quiets the thought that keeps returning as the runway lights rush toward the nose of the aircraft. Today, they will fly farther than the fighters can follow. The wheels lift. The ground falls away. Below them, England fades into darkness as the bombers climb, one formation joining another, long streams of aircraft turning east. At altitude, the cold sets in. Breath fogs inside oxygen masks. Frost creeps along the metal frames of the windows. Somewhere ahead lies the coast, and beyond it, enemy airspace. The escorts will take them part of the way. They always do. But there is a line in the sky, invisible, absolute, where the fighters must turn back. Fuel decides it. Physics enforces it. And every man on board knows exactly what that moment means. Once the escorts peel away, the bombers will continue alone. They know the British tried this before. They know what happened when daylight bombers met German fighters head-on. Those lessons were paid for in burning aircraft and empty bunks. And yet, the Americans are flying anyway. They believe that daylight gives them something the night never can. They believe that if they can see their targets clearly enough, they can strike precisely enough to end the war faster and save lives in the long run. It is a belief strong enough to carry thousands of men into the sky. As the formation settles into its long climb, contrails beginning to stretch behind them like chalk lines across the blue. No one speaks of what waits beyond that invisible line. But every crewman is already counting the hours until they must cross it. Daylight offers clarity. At 20,000 feet, the world sharpens into lines and shapes. Rivers bend like maps. Rail yards stretch across the ground in neat grids. Factories reveal themselves not as guesses, but as places you can point to and say, there. For planners, this clarity is seductive. If you can see the target, you can hit it. If you can hit it precisely, you can destroy the enemy's ability to fight without destroying everything around it. And if you can do that, perhaps the war ends sooner. But the same light that reveals the target also reveals the bomber. In daylight, there is nowhere to hide. German radar tracks the formations long before they reach the coast. Controllers vector fighters toward them with calm efficiency. Anti-aircraft batteries prepare their guns, calculating altitude and speed, waiting for the bombers to enter carefully measured boxes of sky. Up here, survival is not random. It is engineered. Every advantage belongs to the defender. Fighters can see the bombers from miles away. They can choose when to attack, from what direction, and how often. Flak does not need to hit an aircraft to damage it. It only needs to break a formation, force a bomber out of position, expose it. And once a bomber falls behind, the sky notices. Daylight turns the air war into something brutal and mathematical. Time on target, time under fire, time until fuel runs out. Each minute over enemy territory increases the odds against you. The British learned this lesson early. They learned that courage did not change the physics of the sky. That visibility helped the attacker aim, but it helped the defender hunt. Which is why, after suffering losses they could not replace, they turned away from daylight altogether. To them, the sun was not an advantage. It was a warning. The British did not abandon daylight bombing lightly. They tried it first. In the early years of the war, British bombers crossed the channel in daylight, flying without escorts, convinced that speed, formation, and discipline would be enough to protect them. They were wrong. German fighters rose to meet them again and again. Losses mounted not gradually, but brutally. Entire crews vanished in a single mission. Aircraft that returned were riddled with holes, barely holding together, proof of how close the margin truly was. The numbers told a story no one wanted to hear. At those loss rates, Britain would run out of trained crews long before Germany ran out of targets. Courage could not close that gap. Determination could not refill empty cockpits. So the British adapted. They moved into the night. Not because it was accurate, and not because it was clean, but because it allowed their bombers to survive. Darkness broke the defenders' advantage. Fighters struggled to find their prey. Flak fired blindly. Crews still died, but fewer of them. It was a hard, pragmatic choice. When the Americans arrived in force, they brought a different conclusion. They studied the same sky, the same enemy, the same wreckage, and reached another answer. Where the British saw daylight as a trap, the Americans saw an opportunity not yet fully tested. They believed the British had quit too soon. American planners argued that new bombers were tougher, faster, more heavily armed, that tight formations could create walls of fire, that discipline and precision could succeed where earlier attempts had failed. Most importantly, they believed accuracy mattered more than safety. Night bombing, they argued, scattered destruction but rarely broke specific targets. Factories were damaged, not destroyed. Rail yards were hit but quickly repaired. Daylight offered the chance to strike the war at its center. This was not arrogance. It was conviction. 2 allies, 1 enemy, 1 sky, and 2 conclusions that could not both be right. The American answer to daylight bombing was not blind optimism. It was a system. Long before the first mission crossed the coast, planners filled rooms with diagrams, calculations, and assumptions. They measured altitudes, plotted approach routes, and calculated how many guns could be brought to bear from every angle. At the center of the idea stood the bomber itself. These were not the light aircraft of the early war. They were heavy, armored, bristling with machine guns. Guns in the nose, guns in the tail, guns above, below, and on the waist. Each bomber was meant to protect itself, and more importantly, to protect the aircraft flying beside it. The formation was everything. Flying close together, dozens of bombers could overlap their fields of fire, creating a moving fortress in the sky. A fighter attacking one aircraft would be exposed to several others. The theory was simple. The closer the formation, the safer every bomber inside it would be. Precision completed the equation. American. Crews trained relentlessly to hit specific targets, factories, power plants, rail junctions, rather than cities. Bomb sites were refined. Crews drilled until they could recognize their aim points from miles above the ground. The belief was clear. If bombers could survive long enough to strike accurately, they could cripple the enemy's ability to wage war. No need to burn entire cities, no need to fight everywhere. Just remove the critical pieces one by one. And there was another promise hidden inside the theory. Precision meant fewer missions. Fewer missions meant fewer losses. And fewer losses meant the math might finally work. To many American planners, this was not reckless. It was humane. A way to shorten the war and spare lives on all sides. But the theory depended on perfection. Perfect formations, perfect discipline, perfect visibility, perfect machines. It assumed that crews would hold formation while flak tore holes through wings and fuselages. That damaged. Aircraft could stay in position. That fear would not stretch distances measured in feet into gaps measured in yards. Most of all, it assumed that enemy fighters would play by the rules the planners had imagined. As the bombers climbed and turned eastward, the theory went with them, carefully built, beautifully logical, and untested against a determined enemy who had no intention of cooperating. The first missions do not collapse the theory, at least not at once. The formations cross the coast and push inland, just as planned. Bombers hold their positions, guns track the empty sky. For long minutes, nothing happens. Then the fighters arrive. They do not charge head-on as the theory expects. They circle, they probe, they test the edges of the formation, searching for small gaps where discipline has already begun to fray. A single bomber drifts slightly out of position, slowed by engine trouble, shaken by turbulence, struggling to maintain altitude. It is only a few seconds behind. That is all it takes. Fighters dive through the opening, firing in quick passes, never lingering, never staying long enough to be caught in overlapping fire. They are not trying to destroy the formation. They are trying to unpick it. Flak adds to the pressure. Bursts bloom in the air ahead, black and violent, forcing bombers to adjust course. Every correction stretches the formation a little more. Every evasive move creates new gaps. Inside the aircraft, the theory feels very far away. Gunners fire at shapes that flash past too quickly to track. Pilots fight the controls, trying to hold formation while the aircraft shudders under near misses. Navigators watch landmarks slide by, knowing that turning back is not an option. The bombers are still flying together, but they are no longer flying cleanly. Crews begin to realize that survival depends not just on the strength of the formation, but on the weakness of the weakest aircraft within it. The system only works if every bomber performs perfectly for hours at a time under sustained attack, and perfection proves fragile. As the bombers turn for home, damage accumulates. Aircraft limp back alone or in small groups. Some do not return at all. The losses are not yet catastrophic, but they are steady, predictable, and deeply unsettling. For the first time, a quiet question spreads through briefing rooms and crew quarters alike. If this is what happens near the edge of enemy territory, what will happen when they go deeper? For all the planning, one problem refuses to disappear: fuel. Fighter escorts are fast, agile, and deadly, but they are also small. Every mile they fly away from their bases is a mile they must fly back, and fuel is unforgiving. Over enemy territory, the escorts fly a careful calculation: throttle settings, minutes on the clock, a reserve that cannot be touched. There comes a point when the math ends. One by one, the fighters begin to peel away. They rock their wings, dip their noses, and turn back toward home. It is not cowardice, it is necessity. The bombers keep going. From the cockpit, the moment is unmistakable. The escorts fall behind, then disappear. The sky feels suddenly wider, quieter, exposed. The German fighters know this moment too. They have watched the patterns. They know exactly how long the escorts can stay. They wait, circling beyond reach, conserving fuel and ammunition. Then, as the last friendly fighter turns away, they attack. Without escorts, the bombers are forced to rely entirely on their formations. Every gun matters. Every gap is dangerous. Every damaged aircraft becomes a liability not just to itself, but to those around it. Attacks come in waves. Fighters slash through the formation, pull up, climb away, then return from a different direction. They are not reckless. They are methodical. Each pass costs the bombers something: a gun jammed, an engine leaking oil, a wing spar weakened by flak. The formation begins to thin. The bombers are still fighting. They are still hitting their targets. But the price is becoming clear. Daylight precision is possible. Survivability is not like this. By the time the bombers turn for home, many are alone. The formations that launched together return scattered across the sky. The question is no longer whether the escorts are useful. It is whether daylight bombing can continue without them at all. Despite the losses, the missions continue. In fact, they go farther. The logic is relentless. If daylight bombing is to work, it cannot stop at the edges of enemy territory. It must reach deep into Germany, where the war is made, into factories, assembly plants, and industrial cities far beyond the fighter escort's range. These are not probing attacks. They are decisive blows, planned with the expectation that they will change the course of the air war. Briefing rooms fill with maps marked by long red lines stretching across the continent. Targets are named with confidence. Timetables are precise. The tone is firm, controlled, almost calm. This is necessary, the crews are told. This is difficult, but manageable. This will be worth it. Among the air crews, confidence and unease exist side by side. They trust their aircraft. They trust their training. They trust the men flying beside them. Many have already survived missions that once seemed impossible, but they also know the numbers. They know how far they will fly without protection. They know how long they will be exposed, and they know that every previous deep mission has returned fewer aircraft than it launched. On the morning of these raids, rituals become sharper. Lucky charms are checked, letters are folded and tucked away, jokes are told too loudly, then fall flat. No one says the obvious truth out loud, that this time the odds feel different. As the bombers form up and turn east, the scale of the operation becomes clear. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of men, miles of sky filled with engines and contrails. From the ground, it looks unstoppable. From the air, it feels fragile. Once again, the escorts will turn back. Once again, the bombers will press on alone. But this time, There will be no quick exit, no shortening the route, no turning away early. Every mile forward commits them further. High Command believes this is the moment the theory proves itself, that concentrated, precise daylight attacks will finally overwhelm German defenses and break the Luftwaffe's grip on the sky. For the crews, belief is simpler. They believe in getting through the next hour, then the next, then finding a way home. As the formation disappears inland, stretching toward targets no American bomber has ever reached before, the gap between confidence and reality begins to close. And it will close violently. The waiting ends suddenly. German fighters rise in numbers the crews have not seen before. Not scattered pairs or probing attacks, but coordinated waves, climbing hard, positioning themselves above and ahead of the formation. Then they dive. The sky erupts into motion. Fighters slash through the bombers at closing speeds that leave no time to think. Tracers tear past windows. Cannon shells rip through aluminum skin. One moment an aircraft is there. The next, it is falling away, trailing smoke and flame. The formations try to hold. Pilots fight to stay in position as explosions rock their aircraft. Gunners fire until barrels glow, tracking targets that vanish and reappear in seconds. Orders crackle over the radio, half heard, half lost in static and shouting. Flak fills the gaps between attacks. Black bursts detonate with brutal precision, shattering the air itself. Bombers are lifted, dropped, twisted out of alignment. Each near miss batters nerves and machines alike, loosening rivets, damaging control surfaces, draining strength minute by minute. The attacks do not stop. They come. Again and again, from above, from behind, from the sides. Fighters climb away, regroup, and return. The bombers cannot outrun them. They cannot turn away. They can only endure. One aircraft drops out of formation, then another. Some spiral downward, out of control. Others hold level flight for long seconds before suddenly breaking apart. Parachutes appear, tiny against the vast sky, drifting where formations once flew. Inside the remaining bombers, time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. Each new attack is expected, and still shocking. Crews work automatically now, muscles aching, voices hoarse, minds narrowed to the next few seconds of survival. And still, the formation presses on. Bombs are released, targets are struck. The mission is technically a success, but success is becoming meaningless. By the time the bombers finally turn for home, the sky behind them is littered with gaps. Aircraft that should be there are simply gone. The formation that entered enemy territory as a single mass now stretches thin, broken into fragments. The catastrophe is not a single moment. It is the slow, relentless realization that the cost is higher than anyone planned for, and still rising. The bombers return in ones and twos, not in the great orderly streams they departed in, but scattered across the sky, damaged and uneven, arriving at different airfields hours apart. Some land with engines barely turning. Others overshoot runways, brakes failing, crews too exhausted to react. Ground crews count them as they come in. They know how many launched. They know how many should be returning. The gaps are impossible to ignore. In briefing rooms, maps are rolled up and set aside. The focus shifts from targets struck to aircraft missing. Names replace call signs. Crews wait for hours, hoping for late returns that never come. Bunks remain empty that night. At headquarters, the calculations begin immediately. Loss rates are compared to production. Training pipelines are measured against reality. The numbers are cold, but the meaning is clear. At this pace, the force will destroy itself. It does not matter how accurate the bombing is. It does not matter how important the targets are. No air campaign can survive losses like these for long. The realization spreads quietly. Daylight bombing, as it is being flown now, cannot continue. Not without change, not without protection, not without accepting that the theory, however elegant, has failed its first real test. Missions are paused. Routes are reconsidered. Deep raids are quietly curtailed. The question is no longer whether daylight bombing is dangerous. That has been answered. The question now is whether it can be made survivable, or whether the Americans will be forced to follow the same path the British chose before them. The answer does not come quickly. There is no single invention, no sudden breakthrough that saves the daylight bombing campaign overnight. Instead, the solution arrives in pieces, shaped by loss forced by necessity. The first change is obvious. The bombers need escorts that can stay with them, not part of the way, not almost to the target, all the way there and back again. Engineers push range to its limits. Extra fuel tanks are added. Performance is traded for endurance. Fighter designs are adapted for a role they were never meant to fill. Long, exhausting hours at high altitude, far from home. But range alone is not enough. The second change is quieter and more important. Escort fighters stop flying defensively. They are no longer there simply to hover near the bombers and react when attacked. Instead, they are given freedom to roam ahead, to hunt, to engage German fighters before they can organize their attacks. The mission shifts. The bombers are still the reason for the flight, but the real battle now happens around them, beyond them, sometimes miles away. The escorts take the initiative, are forcing German pilots to fight on unfavorable terms or stay on the ground. For the first time, the Luftwaffe is no longer choosing when and where combat happens. The sky begins to change. Bombers still take losses. The danger does not disappear. But the rhythm is different. Attacks are broken up. Fighters are intercepted before they can strike in mass. The long, relentless pressure begins to ease. Daylight bombing finally starts to resemble what the planners once imagined. Not safe, but survivable. The doctrine does not collapse, it evolves. What failed was not the idea of daylight precision, but the belief that bombers could fight alone. The air war demands teamwork on a scale never fully understood before. By adapting, the Americans do not abandon their theory, they complete it. The change is not immediate. There is no single day when the sky suddenly becomes safe. But slowly, mission by mission, something shifts. German fighters still rise to meet the bombers, but now they are met first. Escort fighters sweep ahead of the formations, climbing higher, searching actively, forcing combat on their own terms. Attacks that once came in carefully timed waves are broken apart before they can form. The Luftwaffe is pulled into a battle it cannot avoid. Every interception costs experienced pilots. Every engagement drains fuel, aircraft, and confidence. Losses that were once rare begin to mount, not among bombers, but among the fighters meant to destroy them. The balance begins to tilt. For bomber crews, the difference is felt before it is fully understood. Attacks are shorter, gaps close more quickly. Aircraft still take damage, but fewer are isolated, fewer are hunted down alone. Survival becomes more than hope. Over time, the effect compounds. German airfields are struck repeatedly. Training pipelines strain. Veteran pilots are lost faster than they can be replaced. The Luftwaffe is still dangerous, but it is no longer dominant. By the time major ground operations approach, the sky has changed character. It is no longer a place where German fighters wait uncontested for their moment. It is contested airspace, and that difference matters. Daylight bombing no longer bleeds itself dry. It becomes a sustained pressure, wearing down the enemy's ability to resist, mission after mission, until control of the air slowly, irrevocably shifts. The war in the sky is not won in a single battle. It is won by endurance. Daylight bombing did not win the air war by itself. It demanded too much, too early, and it took its payment in men who never saw the solution arrive. Crews who flew when the theory was still unfinished, when protection fell away at an invisible line in the sky. Their absence is the true measure of the cost. The later success of daylight precision bombing rests on what they endured, on missions flown before survival was possible, when belief had to stand in for certainty. In the end, the sky was not conquered by a single idea, but by adaptation, by accepting hard truths, by changing doctrine to match reality instead of forcing reality to obey doctrine. The Americans did not prove the British wrong. They proved them incomplete. Night bombing preserved a force when daylight could not. Daylight precision, once protected, applied pressure night never could. Together, they closed the sky over Germany. When the war ended, the lessons remained. Air power would no longer be measured only by bravery or technology, but by systems that evolved under fire, and by the understanding that no aircraft fights alone. For the men who flew into the sun without escorts, there was no legacy briefing, No final explanation. Only empty bunks, silent seats, and the knowledge that the sky they helped change would never again be the same.